Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
In the last video, we've been talking about the relationship between words and explanations of the work and whether another person can understand that or whether they will have the same understanding as the person speaking to them. Over to you.
Yes, I wanted to give a title. It's quite difficult because the subject is quite complex. I called it the correspondence problem. I wanted to show, that's what I did in the last interview, that the correspondence problem, of course, was not invented by Alexander. And the way Alexander proposes the correspondence problem is quite strange because for him, it's the idea that knowledge concerned with sensory experiences cannot be conveyed by word, and sometimes he say by word alone. Well, in fact, anything you want to explain to somebody, you cannot ever be sure that the person has got the full meaning. Because as I wanted to demonstrate, the full meaning comes from the person's processing information, working with the ideas and creating out of the ideas a result that corresponds to the meaning you had in mind. Well, you cannot ever be sure that the person is understanding your meaning. Your words are not, the words are not the meaning, of course, as well as the feelings are not the experience, or words are not the feelings of the experience. You have a cascade of correspondence problems. And so it's necessary to ask oneself a question. Why is it that Alexander comes back to this idea? Is it because there is this, at the moment he's writing, there is this big push of people wanting to feel more, wanting to get out of, a sort of jail that they had to correspond to a certain format and could not get out of it. So there was this request for freedom. It's absolutely obvious that requesting for freedom is not going to give you freedom. That is, if you suddenly received freedom, full freedom, you wouldn't know what to do about it. It's freedom in itself is a very complex concept, and anybody has to develop his own understanding of freedom, his own process of, well, maintaining or developing freedom. You haven't got freedom from the fact that from breathing, for example. Try and stop breathing for 3 minutes and you will understand the meaning of my sentence. Yes, there are laws, and there are also laws in our subject, which is the direction, the conscious reason direction of the use of the self. It's as if sometimes you have the impression that the Alexander technique has nothing to do with the conscious reason direction of the use of the self. That is something that you're supposed to receive from a superior organized person that knows how to transmit a direct sensory impression to you, and that direct sensory impression is right. So all you need is to be changed and then to maintain that change. This is a very static view of the idea that the founder had. So it's good to ask us a question: is why is it that Alexander is bringing that subject in his books? And so to start with, I'm going to show you that there are possibilities. I'm not saying that my interpretation is the only one or is the right one. No, not at all. But I want just to open your views on this. So he says, I want to go back to the sentence to show you that there is second level where you can start analyzing the sentence. Obviously, such a description of the evolution of my technique was not as full as one could wish, because any change in manner of use of the self, however brought about, is associated with unfamiliar sensory experiences. And, as is well known, knowledge concerned with sensory experiences cannot be conveyed by the spoken or written word in such a way as to convey the full meaning to the reader. So this is the origin of that idea that the modern Alexander technique developed, that you don't have to read books, you don't have to reason really, because the technique conveys a knowledge that is in fact not intellectual, convey a bodily knowledge, convey something that you feel, that you cannot express. It cannot be said in word. So it's beyond word. Well, it's a clever ploy, really. If you want to set yourself a status, if you want to affirm your position in a society where, well, word and laws and rules and regulations have to be understood. No, in the Alexander technique, there is nothing to understand because it's beyond word, and you will feel whether it's good or not. This idea, I think, is absolutely not what Alexander had in mind. What he had in mind, he wanted to demonstrate or to propose not the technique as something that you get or you get right and that you know how to impart or you know how to perform, but of some sort of process, in fact, based on experiments. And the idea comes from the fact that he says, this sentence comes when Alexander is explaining that any change in manner of use of the self, and he adds, however brought about. You ask yourself the question, however brought about? There are different ways to bring about a change in the manner of use of the self. Well, let's imagine that the teacher, the touch teacher, for example, has brought a change in the manner of use of the self. So it's a manner of use that is different from your habitual manner of use. That is the different movements that you give consent to, for example, organize the lengthening and widening of the mechanism of the torso, is changed. Alexander is saying that you're going to feel, and the feeling that you're going to get is wrong. You're not going to feel that as good. You're going to feel that as different. And the knowledge conveyed by sensory appreciation cannot be evaluated with words. So you just can't evaluate it with words. The idea is that yes, but that does not mean that you cannot evaluate it any other way. By evaluating, remember, we talk about control, we talk about measurement. We can measure whether the torso is lengthening or not, because the definition Alexander gave for lengthening of the torso is a certain geometry of the spine. He explained very clearly that there is no way to lengthen the torso as such. There is no way to extend the spine. The spine cannot be extended. It's not made for that. And anyway, the tension in the fascia and the disc is so strong that there is no way you can distend a spine. So the lengthening is the change of the curves of the spine. And so it's quite easy to, in fact, measure a curve. There is no difficulty in this. You cannot, by feeling, tell whether the change in the use has gone in the right direction or not. but you can measuring the control, the objective control of measurement will tell you whether you are in fact compressing the thoracic spine or not. There is no difficulty in this. So you cannot convey the full meaning of a change to the person by feeling. It's that's for sure. But that does not mean that you cannot convey any meaning and that the person cannot construct a meaning. Because once the person has understood that, oh dear, the meaning of lengthening the spine is geometrical, well, the person will certainly, well, be capable of making decisions according to that principle. It's and that principle, of course, like any principle, has nothing to do with feelings. Feelings and principles are not in the same realm. That's a big difficulty that most people don't understand nowadays, is that if you try and convey a somatic technique, you're not conveying any principle. So the person will maybe feel changed, feel maybe that there is a functioning that is better, whatever that means, because you cannot feel these things, and the person will have an impression of moving much better, an impression of breathing, an impression of a better functioning. Well, yes, but there is a problem. How many times have we seen that when we felt all these things, after being filmed in activity, it was obvious that these feelings were not trustworthy. So convey sensory experiences that are not trustworthy, there is, well, it's not really interesting. It's much better to use conscious guidance and conscious control. That is, you are going to, in fact, explicitly tell about the movements you want to organize. And you are going to objectively control whether the geometry has changed according to what you said or not. This is a reason technique. And in this way, we totally evade the problem of the correspondence between what one says and what one understands of the experience. But understanding an experience does not mean feeling everything of the experience. It's impossible to feel every single aspect of an experience. And you will never, in fact, reproduce the same experience twice. An experience is an event that, in fact, encompasses so many aspects at the same time that it's absolutely impossible, for me at least, to grab in one way, in one go, everything. No, like going from standing to sitting, for example, is a good example. When you watch on video a person performing that action, you can discuss, well, I don't know, 30 different movements that you may see and that you may isolate and show on video as starting somewhere, ending somewhere. The person has no idea of all this, no idea whatsoever. The feeling sense is so imprecise, so general. Well, the person gets an impression of trying to do something impossible. Well, what's impossible for the feeling is just the habit. Well, take on the situation. It's not a reason. Conception. Yes, it's just it feels like this. It feels I have to do a certain type of series of movement in order to reach the chair. And what you're asking me for the moment, for example, stop projecting yourself backward when you reach the chair. It does seem to be impossible not to belong to my activity until you realize it, you make it. And what is very funny is the first time you make it, most of the time you don't realize you've done it. Because in order to do it, you have been instructed to think of so many different things that you were not thinking of where you were going, but it can be shown on video that you've done it. And the person says, oh dear, I have done it. I never realized. So it's necessary to go one step higher and to start, well, to understand that the technique, well, the initial Alexander technique at least, so different from the modern Alexander technique, is to, in fact, start to use speech to model our attention. The question of modeling attention is just beneath the layer that we have started to discuss, which is the correspondence problem. So now let's see what we are, what we mean by an act of thought. I said that speech and thought are not the same thing. It's not because I say something that you understand what is my thought. Why is it I'm saying this? And what are the basis of these words, of saying these words is not said. So the construction of thought has nothing to do with speech, or nothing to do. I mean, by that I mean the complexity of thought. Well, can be missed. When Alexander is writing something, it's quite easy to miss his intent. Why is he saying this? Why is he, in fact, asking us questions that are difficult to answer? You might think that a teacher is a giver of solution. It's very many people have this idea that the teacher is the person bringing solution. I've got the completely different ideas. I think that, like Alexander, it's obviously very interesting in a scaffolding idea in order to bring somebody to reach higher than where the person can reach on her own. It's very interesting to propose problems. You may give tools, you may give certain languages, certain way of organizing the language that will promote the capacity to ask new questions and find answers. But you cannot give solutions to people. If you give solution to people, they do not reach higher. Well, it's not that they don't want to; it's that they will not be able to do it. You have to, in fact, let them work by themselves. The technique is not about giving something, giving an experience, and the more experience you will get, the better. No, the technique is about constructing problems, constructing what I call experiments of conscious guidance, so that I can talk about different parts. I can say how I see them moving in space when the person is performing an action. And I can ask the person, do you think it's possible to change the way these different parts are moving in space, what we call the use of the self? For Alexander, it's, I pointed to it last time, it's absolutely necessary to remind ourselves that when we talk about the use of the self, what we are talking about is a coordinated employment of the movement of different parts at the same time. And what Alexander meant has to do with the capacity that we have to use explicit orders to ourselves, both to promote certain movements, what we call the orders of definite performance, are orders to, in fact, make sure that when we watch the video of the act we've just done, that certain movements appear on screen, and also orders of definite inhibition, which are what we know we don't want to see when the correct orders are performed. So this is the use of the self. The use of the self is not something that is not defined by Alexander. It's defined very clearly. It took 3 books to define it, so you can imagine. So the words, the use of the self, do not represent what Alexander has constructed. Many people are using the word, the use of the self. It seems that they have very little idea of the complex thinking that went into the construction of the concept. So the use of the self is not the concept. It's a label for the concept, but it's not the concept. And if you want to understand the meaning of the use of the self, well, you have some work to do. It's impossible for me to give you just like this. So I can say, yes, you have to have in mind that not only do you need to have a correct conception of a gesture, but you need also to have the capacity to coordinate instructions with physical performances so that you are seen to perform the new use of the self, despite the fact that if you are able to do so, immediately you're going to feel wrong. So what it means is that in order to change the use of the self, you have to accept to feel wrong when doing something right. And Alexander pointed to the fact that this is absolutely not easy. It's one of the greatest difficulty that we have in the process of developing this capacity of reason, direction of the use of the self.
Jeando, can you give everyone a quick definition of what you mean by concept or conception, and maybe an example? So in this context, what do you mean by concept or conception? Because I don't think very many people understand this.
Okay. A concept is what most people would call an idea, but it's an idea that is special because it's an idea that is geared for solving problems. You can have an idea of freedom, but that idea is very general. It hasn't got, to me, the status of concept because you can't use it to solve problems. So the use of the self is a concept that Alexander has developed to solve problems of misdirected activities. He discovered that in his performance of everyday movements, there were movements that were uncalled for, that were not necessary, and that were in fact preventing him from obtaining the result he wanted. So a concept is a construction that requires not to learn it, but you have to know how to construct it. You have to know what are the mental operations that are necessary. So an example, we discuss, for example, the use of the self in going to sit. So when you decide to go to sit, you have to have a clear representation of what the gesture entails. You have to understand that different parts are going to move in space at different speeds, and you have to understand which movements are positive in the sense that they produce balance, they produce poise, so that you can go down to sit. I made a comment the other day. I was seeing a teacher that was going to sit always in the same way, as if systematically losing the support of his ankles. When he was near the chair, that is quite low, nearly to reach the chair, instead of maintaining his balance, he was moving the lower part of the torso so far back that there was no other possibility than to fall. So he was falling. Oh, he was falling into the chair. So it looked like normal. Most people do some things like this. The concept starts when the person first starts to realize that there is another way. there is a possibility of change. Often that happens because you see somebody else sitting and the person is not falling. If you see somebody that is sitting and that is not falling, and you can demonstrate this very, very slowly, then the person will think, wow, dear, I can't do that. So the person will try and do it and will discover that the solution is not obvious. The solution is not, you can repeat the experiment time and time again and not succeed. So the concept you're using in order to solve the task apparently is not appropriate. So it's not a true concept. A true concept is another way of thinking that is going to bring you through the problem. So you will discover that in order to solve that little problem of sitting, you need to organize your thought in a different way. You need, when you say a new concept, it's not just saying you need to know when to start the movement of the knees. You need to know when and where the back should go. You need to know what to do with the shoulder. It's not only that. When we say concept, we mean also that the person has to develop the skill to think of more than one thing at a time. It's not just oh dear, I know a nice concept. No, a concept is a certain way to use the mind in operation. So it's not at all the linguistic view on concept. It's always thinking in terms of modelization of action. How are you going to act? So if you see that a person is suddenly capable of sitting without falling backward, well, it means that the person has changed not only a few ideas taken separately, but the person is suddenly able to have all these ideas working at the same time toward the production of the same result. Do you think that's an explanation for you?
Yeah, that's good.
Sufficient?
That's good. So this is why Alexander starts with the first thing you need to do is work with the conception of the movement before you get to anything else.
Yeah. Exactly. So the conception of the movement is not only how the different parts are going to rotate one relatively to the other. The conception of a real movement is, of course, this psychomechanical aspect of how the parts are going to move, but also the conception entails the capacity to think of these things as they are going, or to anticipate the moment when you are to sit and think, okay, I want to direct these movements together. Even if when I'm going to feel absolutely wrong, I will continue to, in fact, direct all these movements at the same time. And that is the conception. The true conception of the movement is that. It's not just being able to draw out how the different phases are going to evolve. It's you being there in front of the chair and capable of organizing these thoughts in such a way as to prospectively, that is in advance, decide I want this, 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 and this to happen, and I don't want this, 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 and this to happen. It's the both idea of volition and inhibition are in fact involved in the conception of the movement for Alexander. Yes. So I want you to have a look at something that is quite interesting in this correspondence problem, in this view. I was just saying that to conceive a coordinated employment of mechanism is an act of thought. It's an act of thought for most people, for most of us, and every time we try to change the use, because the use, many people have this idea that use is incorrectly directed, and then you have your lesson, and then it will be correctly directed. Well, it's absolutely not the case. It's true that when you start, your use is incorrectly directed. in fact, you direct your use with the mechanism that is Alexander calls instinctive, which is not instinctive. This is automatic. It's like I feel I need to do that in order to do it. This means that I am, in fact, subordinated to the feeling. If I have a pain, for example, the feeling will tell me not to do the movement. So we have a different case where you can suddenly have this reason idea and say, okay, I'm just going to monitor very closely, objectively, what is happening. I am not going to, because some people think that if you don't feel out what's going on, you're not respecting your nature, you're not respecting your body, you're putting your body at risk. Well, we are not putting the body at risk in our experiments because everything is filmed and we know exactly what the person is capable of doing. Well, I mean, what the joints are capable of doing without injury. And it's absolutely obvious that when we give a lesson, everything is made in favor of a good functioning of the joints and bones. So there is no danger in changing the way you sit. But here, the coordinated employment of a mechanism is an act of thought will take another dimension. So here is what Alexander is saying about his second book in the third chapter. He said this whole book is devoted to the exposure of the fallacy of asking any imperfectly coordinated person to attempt to eradicate a defect or peculiarity by some written word or spoken instructions. It is certain that any person who fails to concentrate in the sense of giving due attention to the matter in hand is an imperfectly coordinated person. To ask such a person to overcome his failure to concentrate by concentrating or by learning to concentrate in accordance with his conception of these acts is to call a harmful division, an artificial division of personality. What is needed is the restoration of a satisfactory condition of psychophysical coordination on a general basis, which will involve the use of the true processes of concentration. So this is quite funny, in fact, because it depends on what you read. If you read just the first sentence, it is impossible to eradicate a defect or peculiarity by some written or spoken instruction. You seem to have everything you need in order to understand what Alexander means. Well, if you read the third sentence also, so asking a person to overcome a failure with instructions is impossible unless you train that person to use instruction and in fact create out of this instruction a concept that will be implemented in an experiment. What that is the difficulty of understanding somebody that is really thinking with a high concept, like Alexander is here, and how easy it is to misunderstand what he's saying. So, receiving an instruction needs that you understand the instruction. And putting this instruction into action means that it's necessary for you to direct your attention on it, have the memory there for it. It needs also for you to have confidence in your memory. How many people have I seen having a distrust for their own verbal memory? I give 3 instructions to a person, and I say to the person, I want you to have these instructions in memory, whatever that means. which is understood by most people, that if sometime later, best not too much after I've given the instructions, I will ask the person to repeat the instructions. And after a while, many people, well, most people are able to do that. Yet, it does not mean that they trust their memory, because it's something very interesting to ask them an act of thought, which is to combine these ideas into one intention, all together, one after the other. That is, I am going to perform a new movement. I'm going to sit down. It's a new movement. And this new movement is going to be directed by 3 instructions. And I want the 3 instructions to take effect at the same time when I'm going to sit. It's going to take 2 seconds. It's going to be filmed. And I want these instruction to take 2 seconds. So I ask the person to count 1, 2, 3, so that just we have, when we film, a very neat moment of start, a very neat moment of end. So for example, we want the person to land on the chair balanced. So it means that when the person will have inclined the torso, so we will see on video that there is an angle between the torso and the vertical. One instruction is to, in fact, land on the chair with the same angle of the torso to the vertical. That means that the person is not falling forward, or the person is not falling backward at the moment of reaching the chair with the sitting bones, with the lower part of the torso. It's very easy to check whether it's happening or not. And so when we practice these experiments, it's absolutely obvious when a person has no confidence in memory, because the person then will want to rehearse the orders when it's time to perform the procedure. If you, in fact, repeat the order, if you give the orders at the moment of performance, well, first of all, it's absolutely impossible to do it in 2 seconds. So you will find that the person, instead of saying 1, 2, 3, will say 1, 2, 3, taking time in order for the words to be repeated. But it's absolutely not what is asked of the person. So you will touch on the idea of concept there, because the person is not, in fact, performing all the action at the same time, all together, as in the concept, as it was explained. The person is, in fact, rehearsing the orders one after the other. And as a result, you will see on screen that there is a tendency for some orders to be much more present in the beginning, and some orders to be much more present at the end. So this is not the concept. So instructions are one thing. So you may be explain instructions and understand instructions. So you may have the capacity to give attention to these instructions when they are given to you. Well, at first, it's not that easy. We are not trained at all to use instructions. I can demonstrate that to any person that wants to have a lesson with me. At first, it's necessary, well, to take the time in the lessons to start debunking this idea and finding ways so that the person can give attention to instructions. There is one way not to give attention to a series of instructions, is to start trying to perform one instruction, trying to feel one instruction. If you try to feel one instruction, I can tell you, as a rule, you will not get the full attention on the following ones. The following ones are going to be sidetracked, or they won't make an impression on you. So that when it's time to perform the 3 instructions at once, you can be sure that 2 of them will have nearly disappeared already. So the concept is something where, first of all, there is this capacity to give due attention to a series of instructions. So no more instruction to one than to the other. And you have sometimes to take into account the fact that there are some instructions that you already know, and the teacher suddenly is bringing up a new instruction. Are you going to balance the attention you give to something new relative to something that is old, that is already well performed. You will assume, obviously, that anything that has been performed time and time again will be easy to promote, will tend to take first stage, and that another instruction that have nearly never been put into act, well, will be difficult or will be slower. So it's necessary maybe to reorganize the orders of instruction in your mind, saying, I am going to perform all these instructions at the same time, but I better start with the one that is new. So that when the one that is new is started, just at the moment it starts, I can start the others. Because if I do start the others, well, there is very little chance that the new one is going to happen. So these are not rules. These are basis for experiment. You want to see whether you can affect your reason use using instructions. It's not, you're given instruction, that's it. No, the conception of these acts, like concentrating, like giving attention, modeling attentions using instruction, well, it's a discovery, it's an exploration, if you want. So a concept, a high-level concept, requires a different way of using thoughts and a different way to use attention, to use memory, to use your capacity of decision, because there is also involved in concept the capacity of decision. If you have no capacity of decision, we can't say that concept exists really. It's like solving a mathematical problem. You're presented a mathematical problem and you're asked to solve it. Well, you're going to make many, many different attempts. You're going to try and combine ideas in different ways and see if that leads you to the solution. The Alexander technique is not like arithmetic, where you say, what is 4 and 4? Well, you don't need much mental capacity. So the concept is very low in order. But there are other problems that needs, for example, how to sit down on a chair in balance, poised. Well, that is not at the level of 4 and 4 and 4, 4 by 4. It's a completely different question. It's then you may spend, for example, your life with this very curious intellectual problem of directing your use just to sit down on a chair. So Alexander is talking of satisfactory condition of psychophysical coordination on a general basis. Most people think that this is just, for example, somebody is bringing you to satisfactory condition of psychophysical coordination. No teacher is capable of transmitting a satisfactory condition of psychophysical coordination. Psychophysical coordination is the capacity of a person to use instructions, or in this case, a series of instructions, and perform a gesture that correspond to the model. So it's impossible to teach. I mean, to give it to somebody makes no sense. It's something that the person practices. It's an action it's a physical and thinking action of the person. So you cannot give it. You can, in fact, propose a situation where the person is going to be confronted with the need to use coordination on a psychophysical level. So that's what an initial Alexander teacher will do. You will explain how you can put yourself in such a situation where you're able and you can see and you can affect how you coordinate the different parts of the torso. even if the teacher was modeling your torso with his hands, there will be a moment when the teacher will not be there. And you'll have to model these conditions yourself. So this is the difference between a somatic technique, where teachers know what it's right, and will manipulate people time and time again in order to have them repeat what is right. And another technique where the idea is for every one of us to experiment. It's to explore, and it's to construct. The big word in the correspondence problem is to construct. It's the big word with concept too. You have to, of course, with the help of the teacher, what you do at first is that you co-construct. The teacher is going to give you the first few tools and the first few items that you need in order to start constructing. So he's constructing with you. Well, he's not doing it for you. And as we are not touching people, they have to, in fact, perform the gesture themselves. And we can evaluate with them how the gesture has been performed. We can try to, from the performance, infer what sort of orders they have forgotten, if they have. But because you're given 4 orders to perform all at the same time. Well, it's obvious that sometimes you're able to perform 3 orders at the same time and not 4. One is missing. It's very interesting. There is a limit for the moment. The person can perform 3 orders and not 4. That's a very interesting problem of construction. So if we change the orders, would it be possible for the person to, in fact, perform the 4 orders as requested? And sometimes you will find something absolutely astonishing, is that if the person cannot perform 4 orders, maybe the person needs 5. When the person will have 5, maybe for some reason you will see that, yes, suddenly the person has gone 1 more. Instead of performing 3 orders at the same time, the person is performing 4 orders at the same time. Still not the 5 we requested, but 4, which is 1 better. And so 1 better is not like a sum where I know when are you going to give me the 5th order, the 6th order, is a question you may hear sometimes. It's quite funny because in fact to go from 4 to 5 may take 6 months. It's you cannot anticipate these things. It depends on how the person starts to quieten the mind in order to have more ideas at the same time, how the person is going to use this new organization and change the use of the self, because the 2 things are going to work together. You will find that the person is suddenly a bit more capable of being in balance, a bit more stable, a bit more balanced and quiet. And as that is going on, suddenly the person is able to perform orders. You wouldn't be able to perform many orders with a poor coordination of gestures. So the 2 work together. It's how difficult what we are discussing is. So now, some people have this very, very abrupt statement that it's impossible to convey the technique without the hands. These subjects come up every time when you discuss the Alexander technique with modern Alexander teacher. They will come back with the idea that we are discussing a skill to direct the self. All these intellectualities and concept, they can't even see why Alexander is talking about it. They don't represent the use of the self as a coordinated psychophysical activity in which the reason is playing the part of, in fact, analyzing the situation, creating the orders of movements. They don't understand really much what we mean by order of movement. The decision to move, for example, the upper part of the arm, make a rotation and decide where the center of rotation should be. It's not something that is part of their world. What is part of their world is the somatic action of touching, of nurturing with hands, of well, creating a sensory experience for their pupil. But the question is there: is it possible to teach with touch? No, most of the time they say it's not possible to teach without touch. Yes, but I ask the question, the opposite question, and I say, is it possible to touch and not impart the concepts of psychophysical activity? And the answer is in pictures. I look at how Alexander is organizing a lesson, and so it's this old film where Alexander is seen working with a young gentleman, and at the end of the film, it's quite obvious that the mechanism of the torso of the person has been lengthened, and the characteristics are unmissable. It's absolutely obvious that the upper torso has been moved so that we can see that the rib cage is poised in a very definite way. The sternum bone is vertical, the back line is vertical, and Alexander has both his hands on the torso of the person so that we see how far forward the head can be from the torso. And I've taken a nice picture on the right that I've found on the internet where we have a new Alexander technique where it's obvious that the teacher is very interested in the position of the head and the torso should follow. Well, when in fact it does not follow. It's absolutely obvious that that young person is pulling the upper torso very far backward relatively to the middle torso. She's really pulling back. And yet you can't see it here, but a smile of satisfaction is present on both the face of the teacher and the face of the student. So the idea is that this image convey the idea that all is well, all is going well. Well, it's possible not to think so. What has the person learned, really? Has the person developed a new way to manipulate instructions, a new way to organize attention, a new way to make decisions and not do kinesthetically what has been said to be right? It's absolutely obvious that the sternum is completely backward at the top. So this is no model of lengthening of the back. Oh, well, for the sternum to be so far back from the middle, you have to understand that the thoracic spine must be very far back relatively to the lumbar spine. This, you cannot escape it. Yes. So I started to ask myself questions and I started to observe. And so, for example, you see the modern Alexander technique and the old Alexander technique. So there is Alexander standing and there is Walter Carrington standing. I know that Walter Carrington is a fantastic man. He was a fantastic man. He was very helpful. But nevertheless, you still need to ask yourself questions, because when you are a teacher of the Alexander technique, you are imparting knowledge. So you have to ask yourself the question of that knowledge, and you have to ask yourself the question whether when the person is transmitting a change, well, that change has to be based on something. Of course, it's not a diagnostic like a doctor would make a diagnostic, but still, you need to, in fact, judge which movements are appropriate and which movements are not. And so the technique is supposed to be a system of ideas and instructions that will help you to direct the use of the self in activity. I'm afraid that the direction of use of the self in activities that I see here, Walter Carrington performing during this session is is not what I would call a lengthening of the back. I see the protruding abdomen. I see that the sternum is inclined backward at the top. When I compare the two teachers, they are not performing the same thing. How come? How is that possible? If through the feeling, the person had a correct understanding and representation of the position in space. So is feeling trustable after a while, or is it not? These are fundamental questions, and so you can go on with this. And I use these pictures because I think it's important that we have something under our gaze. So there is a modern Alexander technique on the right again, and we see Alexander organizing the mechanism of the torso as a student. It's absolutely obvious, at least to me, and a few of the teacher I work with, that the chest poise is different. Is absolutely reason on the left and absolutely not on the right. You have a modern Alexander teacher, a trainer of teacher. And this trainer of teachers says that without the hands, you cannot learn the Alexander technique. Well, maybe so. And in that case, it's we should say that it's impossible to learn the modern Alexander technique, because you cannot, with hands, learn the initial Alexander technique. The organization of the torso relatively to the middle torso, of the upper torso relatively to the middle torso, is absolutely, incorrect here. The person is pulling down, the abdomen is protruded, the upper shoulder are back. So it's a strong question to ask ourselves, and to be in this discussion. Is it possible to, in fact, teach with hands? Is it possible to bring a person to change a conception with hands? If you want, that's the question. Any comment, Kevin?
Yes, I think there's part of the problem is a misunderstanding of the word psychophysical. So people hear psycho and they think it just means feeling or your general state of awareness. So they don't include the intellect and conceptions in the idea of psychophysical. So when they're reading the books about psychophysical unity, psychophysical activity, they think it's okay to just throw out intellect and reasoning and principles because the psychophysical means just feeling yourself in the body, being very deeply feeling, or embodiment in these things.
Yeah, unfortunately, they should read Alexander, FM Alexander, because he's clearly stating that you cannot trust this in the understanding of how to understand, how to promote a new use. You have to promote the way to direct the use of the human mechanisms. And when Alexander talks about the human mechanisms, you have to understand that there is a big part of these mechanisms which are intellectual. The difference between an animal and us is not the physical, it's the intellectual part. And why is it that we can change use? How is it that Alexander changed his own use? He didn't do any somatic experiments, any somatic exploration. It's absolutely obvious that he started to train to use instructions in series. So there is a long way to go. I think in the sense that bringing back people to read Alexander, and not to read, but to study, to experiment with, to evaluate. I think it's not too late. It's possible to, as you've seen during your lesson, it's possible to, in fact, experiment and explore in a new direction. But a lot of work is required, though, to change these ideas. It's not a few interviews that is going to achieve that. We have to do a lot more.
Well, people don't need to worry. We will be doing a lot more. So, okay, thank you, Jeando. For everyone watching the video, you'll get links to Jeando's website and how you can book a lesson with him underneath this video. And we will see everyone in the next video. So we'll be continuing the discussion on similar topics. Okay, thanks, Jeando.
Thanks, Kevin. Bye.